When we claim to be someone who's not a people pleaser, there's often a painful truth hiding behind those words that we'd rather not confront. We're terrified that if we stop trying to make others happy, they'll realize we're worthless and leave us anyway. This desperate attempt to project independence can be a thinly veiled cry for validation, revealing an underlying anxiety that's as old as the insecurity that's driving it. If you've ever known someone who proudly boasts of not caring what others think, only to reveal a shocking vulnerability when things don't go their way, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In this video, we're going to dive into the unspoken language of I'm not a people pleaser, and what it really reveals about a person's deepest insecurities. When someone insists they are not a people pleaser, but can't help but offer unsolicited advice or opinions, what they are really revealing is a deep-seated insecurity about being irrelevant or invisible to others. Their attempts to assert control through a facade of independence often hide a desperate need for validation, particularly from those they perceive as authority figures or social status symbols. Notice how they subtly shift the conversation to steer it in a direction that highlights their supposed nonconformity, when in fact, it's just a cry for attention and a desperate bid to feel seen and heard. By labeling themselves as a non-people pleaser, they are actually attempting to deflect attention from their own insecurities, like fear of rejection or abandonment, which they are terrified of confronting head-on. Their language often betrays a tone of I'm only doing this for myself or I'm not doing this to impress, but what they really mean is I'm doing this to avoid being perceived as weak or vulnerable. What's truly revealing is when they become overly defensive or dismissive when confronted with evidence that contradicts their I'm not a people pleaser narrative. It's a telltale sign of a deeply wounded ego that's desperately trying to protect its self-image at all costs. When people insist on branding themselves as the non-pleaser, I've found it's usually a clever attempt to deflect from the underlying fear of being rejected or abandoned, a deep-seated insecurity that drives their every move. This I'm not a people pleaser label serves as a form of psychological armor, a shield that keeps others at bay and conceals the true desperation for validation and love that lies beneath. In reality, people-pleasing is rarely about pleasing others, but rather about seeking the validation and approval of those around us, a misguided attempt to fill the void left by an unfulfilled need for self-acceptance. By claiming to be the non-pleaser, individuals often believe they're exerting control over their environment, dictating the terms of their relationships, and maintaining a sense of autonomy in a world that can sometimes feel overwhelming. The irony is that this behavior often leads to a loss of self, as the individual becomes increasingly defined by their attempts to please others, sacrificing their own needs and desires in the process. Ultimately, the I'm not a people pleaser narrative is a thinly veiled attempt to hide the truth that we're all desperate for love, connection, and acceptance, and that our greatest fear is being unworthy of it. When someone claims they are not a people pleaser, what they are often masking is their deep-seated fear of rejection, which ultimately stems from insecurity about their own self-worth. This so-called independence they tout is, in reality, a desperate attempt to maintain control over others, dictating how they should react to them, thereby deflecting the fear of being abandoned or ridiculed themselves. By invoking this defense mechanism, they are inadvertently broadcasting their need for validation, desperately seeking affirmation from others to shore up their crumbling sense of self. The irony is that the more they loudly proclaim their immunity to people-pleasing, the more we can infer they are, in fact, deeply invested in seeking the approval and admiration of those around them. In reality, this persona of the tough individual who refuses to be swayed by the opinions of others often conceals a seething mass of insecurities, anxieties, and unmet emotional needs that they desperately try to keep hidden beneath a veneer of invincibility. Behind the facade of confidence and self-assurance lies an underlying fear of being deemed unworthy, unattractive, or unlovable, a fear that they dare not confront directly. Hence the perpetual need to deflect and manipulate the perceptions of others. When you say you're not a people pleaser, what you're really saying is that you've built a reputation around being independent and strong-willed that you're terrified to risk losing. People-pleasing is not the issue. The issue is a profound fear of rejection that makes you cling to this idea of being a nonconformist, even if it numbs your emotions and prevents genuine connections. The people-pleaser's dilemma is less about pleasing others and more about desperately seeking validation from them to fill a void within yourself that you're too afraid to confront. You're not saying no because you're assertive, you're saying no because you're trapped in a fear of being vulnerable and being rejected, and the only way you can avoid that pain is by controlling the situation through your boundaries. Deep down, the people-pleaser is not rejecting others, they are rejecting their own deep-seated fear of being abandoned, which makes them cling to a persona that's essentially a shield to protect themselves from the possibility of hurt. The unspoken language of "I'm not a people-pleaser" reveals a desire to appear fearless and in control, but ultimately it's a desperate cry for help, a silent scream that says please validate me, please notice me, and please love me for who I am, but I'm too scared to say that out loud. People often believe the mask of not pleasing others makes them appear strong, but what hides beneath is a desperate need for validation, a cry for attention that's constantly ignored. Behind this attitude of "I'm not a people-pleaser" is an anxious individual fighting for control, fearful of being taken advantage of or exploited, even in subtle ways. The real reason some individuals resist pleasing others at all costs is that it exposes their deep-seated fear of being insignificant, a fear that people-pleasing would reinforce, making them feel like they are just an accessory. By insisting they don't care about what others think, some individuals are secretly trying to convince themselves of the same thing, a self-deception born from a deep-seated insecurity. This facade hides an insatiable need for attraction, a yearning for genuine human connection that's often obscured by the armor of defiance, which makes it easier to blame others for lack of connection rather than take responsibility for our own limitations. At its core, the need to assert "I'm not a people-pleaser" is an unconscious attempt to regain a sense of power in relationships, a desperate attempt to dictate the terms, lest we be reduced to mere puppets subject to the whims of those around us. In conclusion, the unspoken language of "I'm not a people-pleaser" often serves as a mask for underlying insecurities and deep-seated fears of rejection or abandonment. Take a moment to reflect on whether you've ever used this phrase as a defense mechanism and what it may be revealing about your own subconscious. If you resonated with this video, be sure to like and share it with others, and let me know in the comments below what you've observed about this phenomenon in your own life. If you're interested in exploring more human psychology insights like this one, be sure to subscribe to this channel for regular updates.